welcome to Cosmic Rescue. I'm Cecily Saylor. I'm the founder of Typewriter Tarot and the creator of this show, which is a space where I talk with creative people about a creative problem they're experiencing, and we explore it using tarot. And we also talk about in this show really important and rich topics that overlap with what it means to live a creative life and what it means to live a fulfilling life as a human being. So lots to enjoy here, and I'm really excited today to be sharing this episode with you, where I talk with Leticia Urieta, who is the author of Las Criaturas, which is a collection of short pieces, poems, flash fiction, and plays that invoke different folklore and mythology from Leticia's family heritage, and also explores what it means to have like the angry feminine, the monstrous feminine, the grotesque feminine, the feminine that has been ostracized and oppressed in society. Really powerful, creative, amazing work that invokes spiritual entities in really interesting ways. And Leticia is also someone who experiences chronic illness, and we talk about how that impacts her creative work. And this tarot reading that we're going to do together specifically explores how to think about that relationship to the body and to illness, and how to cultivate, to the extent we can, a sustainable creative practice in the midst of that. We also talk about, of course, every episode, capitalism. We also talk about MFA programs and some of their downsides. And then, of course, we get into conversations around how illness is treated in our country, some of the things that many able-bodied people take for granted. Really important stuff, and something that we haven't talked about on the show before. So I hope you will watch the entire episode, learn some important, meaningful things, and also feel inspired by Leticia, whose work we would love for you to support. You can purchase her book directly through the press, through Bookwoman here in Austin, through bookshop.org, and multiple other outlets that are not Amazon. So enjoy the episode, try the tarot spread yourself, and yeah, enjoy the magic. Hello, Leticia. Thank you so much for being on Cosmic Rescue. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I feel like we're going to get into some things that have not been discussed on Cosmic Rescue, and also some things that have, like our love for creativity and the importance of storytelling and creating art, always at the forefront of Cosmic Rescue. But to kick things off, will you just talk a little bit about yourself? Tell us about you as you know yourself.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I just love all the work that you're doing, and I love tarot, and yeah, just very excited to talk with you about all the stuff we're going to get into today. Yeah, so my name is Leticia Urieta. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am a local Austin writer. I was actually born and raised in Austin. Yeah, I'm a writer, poet, and a community teaching artist. So I teach creative writing workshops, some to adults, some to youth, and then I am also a program manager and director for two different local nonprofit organizations. So I love writing, I love teaching writing, I love making space for young writers to, learn how to express their creative voices. And so that's kind of my day job, my general work, and of course I write. So.
Yes. I share some of that work background with you, bringing creative writing into schools and community spaces. And I think that's so important because children, and probably like everyone, we're taught writing in a very formulaic way with a lot of standards and expectations, many of which have nothing to actually do with the quality of the writing, but have to do with like the way it looks on a piece of paper. And so I really think it's so important for writers to go out in the community and offer a different kind of story around what it means to be a creative person, and offer different ways of different models for creativity. And so thank you for the work you're doing. I know it's usually underpaid and lots of responsibility and lots of things to do. So yeah, thank you for being one of those community focused writers. And I'd love for you, you have a book that's come out recently, Las Criaturas, and I would love for you to tell us a little bit about the book.
Sure. Yeah, so this is my book, if you can see. I'm in love with the cover, done by a local artist and student at UT, Elaine Almeida, who just did an amazing job. But yeah, it is out from FlowerSong Press, which is a small press out of McAllen, Texas. They're doing just some really, really cool publishing. So yeah, it's a kind of shorter collection of a hybrid collection of poetry and prose. And there's a lot of different stories kind of going on, but it kind of brings in speculative fiction, horror, and kind of blends of different types of traditional stories from my own background and kind of, the mixture of cultures that I am a part of, and kind of utilizes that to tell the stories of women and kind of femme folks who are reacting to trauma, reacting to violence, the limitations of patriarchy and misogyny, and kind of what happens when someone is pushed kind of to their brink or to their breaking point, and what monstrous elements come out because of that. And so there's lots of different types of creatures in the book, and the title Las Criaturas, in Spanish, it technically translates to creatures, the creatures, right? And so there is that kind of aspect of the monster, the creature. I'm a huge horror fan, so that's kind of like where a lot of the work gravitates towards, but it also can mean creature as in child. And so like the childlike in us, there are several stories about children and kind of their perspectives on violence and kind of the things that are happening in their families or to them, including systemic violence. And then there's also kind of the idea of creatures as in like what someone is called when someone thinks of them as lowly, right, or unimportant. And so I'm just trying to explore all those different elements of that word and its multifacetedness. So yeah.
Awesome. Do you want to name some of the cultures that you identify with and
Sure.
lift them up here?
Yeah. So I say I'm Tejana because that's what I just feel like I am the most. My dad's side of the family is Mexican and Mexican American from South Texas, from the Valley. And then, immigrants from Matamoros and Monterrey, so northern Mexico. And then my mom's side of the family is multi-generational Texan, so settlers, colonial folks, right? So the complications of all that, but several of whom have connections to Germany, England, Ireland, and Scotland. And so there's a reference to an Irish kind of creature folktale in the book, specifically a selkie. And then there's also references to some Nahua goddesses and kind of some of the, Nahua or Aztec, right? Like cosmology, knowing that like there are a lot of limitations to my connection with that because I don't, identify as Indigenous necessarily. So like my connection to that, those stories are, kind of very much through the way that a lot of Mexican Americans or Mexican folks, kind of understand that. So, so that's kind of how I went about like bringing in some of those stories, and acknowledging some of those, some of the cultural connections, while also like knowing that, I don't know everything about those stories, right?
Yeah, I think it's really exciting that you're bringing in cultural connections that are, authentically part of your lineage, even though they span very different cultures, and also looking back into like the folklore and the mythology and the cosmology, like you say, of these different cultures. And, even though depending on where our families come from and how recent generations have like joined, and how different culturally they may be, and so many other factors also related to settler colonialism, and white supremacy, it's really difficult for many of us to have a direct experience with these older folk traditions. A lot of them are lost to us just as modern humans. We don't like, we're not learning about them in school, and we're usually not like celebrating them necessarily in our families, or sometimes we are, but some of them not. And so I think it's really beautiful that you're like invoking that and inviting these references and deities and entities into your work. And I'm curious what it felt like to connect with some of these like different powerful female representations, and kind of like some of them are human in a way, but distorted and blended with other entities or figures. And so they become magical, they become grotesque in some cases. And yeah, how was that for you? Was that a spiritual experience as a writer?
It really is. I mean, one of the things, I was actually just reading Women and Other Monsters by Jess Zimmerman, and it's a really, really interesting book, kind of part almost memoir, personal essay, reflections on specifically kind of Greek myths and Greek stories, but that are centered around Greek women and monsters, right? Or like feminized monsters. And I think that's something, but the chapter I was reading was kind of talking about Medusa as a reflection of the ability to embrace the grotesque in yourself and embrace the power of ugliness over the limitations of beauty. And I was really gravitating towards that because I felt like that's something that comes up a lot in my work is when I'm incorporating, especially like horror elements or kind of monster elements, like I've always been interested in exploring the perspective of what, a monster that has kind of traditionally been considered monstrous, and I think like it's something that we naturally do as people, as human beings, is to ponder the monster, like ponder kind of what's their motivation, their perspective. But in a lot of traditional horror films, it's challenging to do that when the monster is a man, is like replicating male violence, or like, replicating, masculine violence against like, mostly women and femme people, right? So like, in this way, I'm hoping to explore, the monster or the creature who has been oppressed, right? Or who has been limited in some way, or who has been forgotten. And so like one of the stories is exploring a Nawa, deity or, kind of goddess or spirit, right? Who, I wanted to kind of think about like what does a goddess or a spirit like that do when they are displaced from their people, when they don't feel a connection, right? And kind of like, what would that connection look like if they were to kind of just meet someone, in real life and in this kind of modern time. In the other story, the Selkie story, it's kind of exploring a child's relationship to their mother, who is a Selkie, who's being essentially held captive in their marriage, right? And kind of this idea of being, of having a mixture of cultures that they're a part of, or kind of like feeling like they don't fit in any one particular society, which obviously is kind of a, not so thinly veiled metaphor for what it's like when you are yourself also multi-ethnic or multiracial, or, kind of bringing in different, experiences of cultures. So,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I think that I watched a documentary recently. It's called The Witch of King's Cross. It's set in Australia in the 1950s, and it's about this woman who was like an artist, an esoteric artist. And she was demonized by like conservative Australian culture, especially in the 1950s. But a lot of what she was creating also reproduced this idea of the monstrous feminine, and what you were saying about like what happens when patriarchy and misogyny like push the feminine figure into like beyond the brink. And it makes me think like, what is the function of the monstrous feminine, and like that it exists as this reaction, perhaps, as you say, to like these ridiculous standards of beauty, or the woman as an object, or the female body as an object for male consumption. And yeah, I just like, I'm interested in that concept. And I think it's wonderful that you're exploring that in your work. And I want to talk a little bit about how the book came to you, and when the book came to you, and what was going on in your life that drew you to this work.
Yeah. Thank you for asking. It's a really, it's kind of a multifaceted response, but so in 2016, I was in my second year of my MFA program, a Master of Fine Arts and Fiction program at Texas State University. And I had made the decision to leave teaching. I was teaching elementary school at the time. And that was a really difficult decision. So I was like in this kind of midst of transitioning into just being in the program full time. I was commuting between Round Rock, Pflugerville area and San Marcos. So just like a lot of driving, very tired, a lot. And, it was also at the kind of crux of, or, a lot of the really dangerous, frightening rhetoric from the Trump campaign at the time. And so especially kind of targeting Latinx peoples, Mexican and Mexican American peoples. And of course, we've seen as well, like targeting Haitians, and Caribbean folks, right? And any immigrant that was not white, and kind of threatening the kind of like amplifying this idea that is so dangerous, that Greg Abbott continues to put forth, of kind of the dangerous border, right, and the dangerous immigrant. And so that was kind of like, all in my periphery. I was seeing firsthand how it was affecting my students. So that was just like a larger anxiety. I was kind of like working with some of those families to like help them as far as just like getting resources for, immigration lawyers and things like that, because that was just a really frightening time. And even some of my own family members were kind of going through that. So like, just a lot of heightened fear. And then, I was, in your second year of your MFA, if it's like a 3-year program, for me, it's kind of the time in which you start really having to like declare what your thesis project is going to be and what it is that you're hoping to leave the program with. And for fiction writers, the expectation is often that it's a novel, right? Or a collection of short stories. And I was working on a novel at the time, and I don't think it was, time, wasted for sure. But while I was working on that book, I just kept coming back to these other stories and these other poems that were just kind of coming out that were often very reactionary. And I really didn't feel like our program, and I don't know how this is in other MFA programs, but it often felt like our program, and it's my hope that this has changed, but at the time, they felt very segmented. It was fiction and poetry, and there wasn't a lot of crossover between the two. And so if you were both a fiction writer and a poet, it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of engagement with your work, right? They didn't know how to react to your work. And so I was just kind of writing a lot of these pieces on the side that were, very angry, and often, kind of, again, reacting to the violence. And then, to be frank, a lot of the stories were also coming out of interactions that I had with classmates and with, some of the faculty that were, not so thinly veiled microaggressions, and I'm privileged enough to say that, like, those were the majority of my experiences were microaggressions, right? Like, I've known people that left the program because they were much more than that. And it was kind of this systemic issues that I think we know is just an issue with academia writ large, right? It doesn't really matter what program you're in. We know that, these are institutions based entirely on white supremacy. And so trying to change the cultures of them, especially in the graduate level, is really challenging because you'd have to change the fundamental nature of the whole program. Anyway, I digress. But so a lot of the stories and pieces were kind of coming out of that. And at the end of my, time at the program, I ended up having, a full kind of manuscript or chapbook. And so I ended up doing both part of my novel and this book as my thesis. And it was actually pretty cool. And I had some really great advisors and faculty who I, kind of had relationships with that were really supportive of that work and tried to find resources for me. So, like, if they knew that that wasn't really their area of expertise, they were trying to find resources for me to kind of help with some of the work that they may not be familiar with. So that was really helpful at the time.
Good. I'm glad you also had supporters and mentors that you connected with. And I appreciate you sharing this about your experience with the MFA program. I went through an MFA program myself and certainly took some wonderful things out of it, but also continue to reflect, especially in the work that Typewriter Tarot does and the attention that I try to pay to supporting creative people and helping creative people like stay connected to their creativity and do it from a place of joy rather than like paralyzing doubt and all of that. The more I realize that, MFA programs are so exalted, there's this belief that it is, the gateway to success as a writer. And as you mentioned, they like higher education institutions are part of the white supremacist system that exists in this country. And they're like another, I guess, like prop in capitalism as well to, maintain the labor force, to keep us in debt so that we need to keep working, all of these things. Yeah. And what I found too is that I didn't really learn a whole lot about my own creativity, about finding a creative process that works for me around like supporting myself as a creative individual. Obviously, like the attention to craft was very helpful. And I did learn so much there that I could like offer it and teach it to other people. But in terms of like a cultural or holistic kind of approach as a program, that is not present. And I went through the program and go through my whole life as a white woman. So most of my perception around like the disparities personally had to do with like the elevation of the men in the program against not always explicitly against the women, but just generally at the expense of whatever. Mm-hmm. And most of them, of course, white men. And at the same time was aware that the women of color and the people of color in the program were having perhaps not only that experience, but one that was even worse around racial and ethnic identification. And so even though these are exalted spaces, even in especially in 2016, but at the advanced place we are in modernity, they are not beautiful bubbles of safety for everyone. So
no, yeah, absolutely.
That's my rant. I'm sure we could mutually rant for a long time, but I will keep us going. You talked about your the experience you start, like all of this, and to your, like the first panic attack I ever had, I was in graduate school, and one of the few I've ever had was in graduate school. And you mentioned, and it's no surprise, I think, that like having to commute all that time, juggle jobs, show up in classrooms where you didn't feel safe, share work that feels vulnerable with a group of students that and faculty who you don't necessarily trust, that you began to experience illness. And will you talk a little bit about that experience and how that's continuing in your life and impacting your creative work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Recently, I was looking back through journals from that time, because I've always been an avid journaler, kind of just since I started writing when I was a kid. And I realized that some of the more traumatic kind of things that happened to me over the course of that year in 2016, immediately after that was when I started experiencing chronic migraines. And I am a firm, trauma has been a huge part of kind of my familial lineage, trauma and abuse. And I am a firm believer in, the ways in which we know that scientifically, biologically, and also spiritually, just how trauma, both like firsthand trauma and also generational trauma, will affect the body. And so I think that probably those experiences, that stress, something was unlocked, maybe something genetic, who knows? A couple of years later, I finally got an MRI and was, which, doesn't necessarily tell you all that you need to know, but so I have a headache disorder that affects just the left side of my face most of the time. And if I don't take, kind of daily medication I would literally probably never be able to leave my house. It's just a daily issue. It kind of comes and goes as far as severity is concerned, but that's something that I think I have, I was just thinking about this recently, that like, I know people who don't wake up every day and are immediately in pain. And that is just a wild, like now several years later, I'm like, man, that's just a wild experience, because there is never a day that I don't have some kind of pain. And I have other health issues and kind of struggles that I've had over the last few years, but that's kind of the thing that when they talk about, having a chronic illness, people often talk about it in terms of diagnosis, right? So like the before you and the after you. And so this is kind of the after me, the aftermath, the person who's now continuously learning to live with this, knowing that it most likely will never go away. So, yeah.
Yeah. And for those of us who do get to wake up pain-free every day.
I'm not trying to call anybody out.
I don't wake up in pain every day. And I am grateful for that, but I also take it for granted, and, let this be a reminder to all of us who have that experience, that it is a gift and it's not happening for everyone. And there's so much illness and physical pain that people experience that goes undiagnosed. Like clinicians, doctors can't pinpoint a diagnosis or a source. and or access to pursuing a possible diagnosis is not available. And, you know, even sometimes when you have a diagnosis, that doesn't necessarily mean there's a solution. And so many of these, so many chronic illnesses are invisible in a way. Like able-bodied people tend to think about disability as something that we can see and identify on another person. And in the absence of something visible, then often there's this like doubt that arises in able-bodied people around what someone may be experiencing, which only, you know, diminishes the reality of what you're going through. So first I want to say, I'm sorry that you're having to live, you know, with these pains in your life and the confusion of not understanding exactly where they come from. And I wonder if you're willing to talk a little bit about like how, you know, in this after you life, like how does this illness and this experience impact your creativity, both informing what you may write about, but also limiting your ability to actually create?
Yeah, I appreciate you acknowledging kind of those challenges, right? Because I mean, even right now, you and I were talking about this kind of earlier, but like I'm having a migraine episode right now, and it is.
I offered to not.
I know, and you did. I am. Yeah, I never want to. And I never want to put the onus on anybody else. I'm powering.
But if you had not told me, of course I would not have known.
Right. And that's something I think I've realized, and it's not always a healthy thing for sure, but like, you know, there's kind of, especially because we live in this capitalist society in which our bodies and our labor are, you know, kind of quantify our value to the world, unfortunately. And I think there are a lot of people in disability justice circles, especially, who are doing amazing advocacy around trying to challenge that and really trying to, you know, to make it clear that that's not a sustainable way for any of us to live, because anyone can become sick and disabled at any given point in time. And I think we've seen that absolutely throughout this pandemic, right? Where folks who were perfectly, you know, healthy, however you want to describe that, you know, got COVID and then are now suffering really debilitating disabilities because of long COVID or, you know, what have you. So for me, I think there are times in which, like right now, you know, just kind of knowing that I really wanted to have this conversation, where I kind of put on a mask and power through it, because if I didn't, I would feel really limited in my life. But I know that that's not always possible. Like right now, you know, you take the Excedrin migraine and you eat something, and then you kind of do your makeup and kind of, you know, do something. And probably immediately after this conversation, I will undress and get back in bed and be there for the rest of the day. But, you know, so I think there are ways in which, of course, it is very limiting. This weekend, I really wanted to like get ahead on a lot of my writing projects, and I don't know that that will necessarily happen now. Sometimes these headaches can last. The worst one I've had, where it was like a really, really bad, couldn't get out of bed migraine, lasted for almost 5 days. So like, which is limiting because I can't drive. You know, it's really difficult to eat. It's challenging to sleep, but then I want to sleep all the time. So, you know, just kind of all these different things. But I do think that it has unlocked in me a creative potential for exploring writing about my body in really raw and open and honest ways, especially lately. And a lot of that has come through, like I said, I love horror. I love all the many different types of horror genres and kind of subgenres. And one of those is body horror. I'm not into torture porn or anything like that. But I do, like films. One of my favorite films, for instance, is the sci-fi horror film, I think in 1978, but don't quote me on that. John Carpenter film, The Thing, not the remake, the original, where, you have this alien creature that can mimic other life forms, right? And it transforms, and it's just really interesting. But I think like that subgenre has really helped me to be able to explore again, like the ugliness, but the power of like what a body is capable of, both in the breakdown of the body in pain, or, someone who is sick, which not everyone finds powerful, and that's totally okay, especially for folks who are dealing with like terminal illnesses, right? It's a very different experience. But I do think that there's just something kind of powerful in becoming your most raw self, where like I started writing a piece recently, was, kind of exploring what would happen if my two sides of myself were ripped in half, and kind of like what would the part of me that is in pain do when I'm unable to kind of be whole, right? And so like, I don't know, I think it kind of opens up more possibilities than it closes, I guess, when you can find the time to write. And sometimes it's about coming up with the idea when you're not feeling well, and then coming back to it later to write it all out.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like I hate to say this because, no shade to anybody who's doing like drug trips. And I definitely hope to explore some of the medicinal, uses of psilocybin in the future, because they're doing really interesting things with that actually for people with neurological disorders. But it is almost like a drug trip sometimes when it's in your head. I don't think people understand. I'm like going on this huge tangent, but
You're good.
But like, I have pain in other areas of my body, and they are, I never want to diminish anyone's pain, because pain is pain. Like it is very debilitating. But I don't think people fully understand that when it's in your face or your head, it's like a totally different experience, because it kind of changes your ability to think and process in very different ways. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Thank you for being with us, even though you are
Absolutely
not feeling well today. And I think it opens up so much conversation or interrogation around our relationship to our bodies, what it means to be embodied or incarnated. I think of like, this is the body I got from my soul to travel through this lifetime until it's over. Mm-hmm. And so it is my vessel, it's my vehicle. It's the way that our soul gets to have experiences of sensory pleasure and pain. And that it's like we have control of our bodies in certain ways, and then our bodies have control of us. Like they have their limitations. And there's also, in spite of all of the negative effects of this, there's a kind of like metaphorical question or concept that arises, like when you're talking about imagining if the two parts of your body could separate, like what would one go do while the other did this? And or even like, what are we without our head? And I'm not trying to like valorize decapitation or something, but just thinking like yeah. Our body has we name all of these different body parts that work together in an integrated way, and one of them may be hurting and the other may be strong. And it's also, of course, very much about like what meaning we assign to the capabilities that our bodies have, and the meanings that are assigned globally to capability of the body. Mm-hmm. But that's just a way of, I don't think that necessarily like went anywhere, but just to sort of expand on what you're talking about a little bit. And maybe that takes us to a place where we're ready to start the tarot reading, which is going to focus on caring for your body and being a creator simultaneously. And we have 4 questions that we're asking the cards today. I'm going to use, if it's okay with you, my Bad Girl tarot deck.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there's some grotesque ladies right there.
I like that.
So the first question, and let's talk about this question a little bit. We talked about this before we started recording, but the first question is, what is my body wanting to tell me through the pain? And I want to preface that with like, I don't want to advance the notion that everyone's physical pain is the result of the body trying to let you know that you're doing something wrong or you have something psychologically broken within you. They're obviously like just clear of their own volition, biological explanations for some illness and pain that we experience. But we do also know that like the body and our sensations are a mechanism of communication. Mm-hmm. They let us know when we're tired, when we're hungry. And I wanted to get, see what other thoughts you wanted to add to this question before we pull a card.
No, I appreciate you, kind of stating that, because I think, it can be really harmful sometimes, right? To like, when we talk about the body, when we talk about health, to moralize it or to, equate any of our actions to, kind of why one person is healthy and another person is not, right? Like, of course, we know that like diet, exercise, all these different things, everything, sleep, stress has a factor in our health, but, we also know that like systemic barriers to, healthy foods to, we know that medical fat phobia is like an extremely dangerous thing that limits people's ability to get, real medical care, being uninsured. So there's like so many systemic factors that I think come into what makes a person healthy. But I will say that like, you stated this earlier, but my relationship with my body, even when I've been most angry with it, and felt most wanting to punish it in some way, in some kind of self-harmful way, which is, never great, but it's just reality for so many people, especially if you are like me and you live with anxiety and depression as well. And there's actually a neurological connection between migraine disorders and depression, but there's kind of that relationship where, you can either be at war with your body, and there's a beautiful book that I felt like I have been coming back to again and again, The Body Is Not an Apology by the poet Sonia Renee Taylor. And that's kind of something that she talks about, is like ending the warfare with your body. And when I've been my most in pain and my most kind of at war with my body, what I have to come back to at the end of the day is, as you said, this is the only body I'm going to get, as far as I know, at least in this life. Who knows what the afterlife holds, all these different things, whatever your belief system is, but this is the only body I get right now. So what am I going to do about that? And that's kind of the thing that I keep having to come back to, even when it is a really challenging thing to accept. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a long-winded explanation for, yes, I like this question.
No, I think it requires nuance, and I appreciate you sharing that and agree with everything that you've said. And I pulled a card as you were talking, and the card that came up is the 4 of Cups. And here you can see the figure has 3 cups on her beach blanket, and then there's this white hand offering a 4th cup, and a little bit of like side eye on her part that's like, do I need this, right? And I'll be curious about your reaction to this, because in some ways I think it's a little bit reductive, but also potentially useful. But this card is, to me, an invitation to actually check in with ourselves internally when something new is being added to our like emotional or energetic plate. And so in one sense, it is about like talking to your body, to your internal voice, to your intuition, and saying like, do I have enough of whatever it is right now, such that I can make a decision about whether or not I want to or need to accept this additional cup. Because if she's like, I'm here for, to make up a little story around whatever we see in the card, like, I'm here for 90 minutes. And let's say there's like some sparkling rosé in here or whatever, and it's a sunny day, it's hot. And she's like, one glass of rosé every half hour, and then I'm doing whatever. I don't know. I don't know why it's because it's cups that it became a drinking metaphor, but, like a fourth cup of rosé might be fun or tasty, but also incredibly depleting after you've had three and after you're sitting in the sun. And if you have things that you want to do with the rest of your day. And so we're also trained, I think, socially to want more always and to acquire more always, regardless of what we have. So yes, go into debt to get that thing, maximize. And then at the same time, I think there's something, when you talked about all of the things that you were juggling while you were in the MFA program, like the driving, the jobs, the writing, like attending classes, studying, and just the amount of energy that you must have had to spread over all of these things simultaneously. You're working basically the same role in two different organizations right now. And I'm sure that as like a leader and as a person who brings others together in community, that there are also all kinds of other requests and demands that people make of you. And, if you're depending on how we grow up and what we've become accustomed to, like if my mom worked 4 jobs to stay afloat and I didn't see her very much, and if, I would just learn that like, that's the way life is. And that's the level of work you have to do to survive. And I shouldn't really expect to have to do any less. Like I literally need to almost kill myself in order to stay alive. Right. And so if that's what I've seen every day growing up, then when it's my turn to be a laborer, I'm probably inclined to think like, I better work as much as I possibly can so that I don't die, even though all of the work is kind of killing me. And so those two things together, we just start to run on autopilot. Like, I better say yes to this, either because the person asking me is more in need than I am, and I'm in a position to help them, or I better say yes to this because no one else is going to offer me this nice thing again, even though I don't really need it now. Or I better say yes because I need the money. Oh, this is another job, another thing that can pay me. So I better say yes. And so just yes automatically without saying like, do I have enough money to get through the month? Maybe I can say no. Is my body ridiculously tired and doing this thing will put me over the edge? And I can say no, et cetera. And so there's a lot of just like programming around say yes, do more, accept more, get more. And then we're wiped out. So that's a long way of sort of explaining the essential quality of this card and some of the nuances of it in relation to this question: what is my body wanting to tell me when I experience, these pains?
Yeah, so much coming up for sure. I don't know if you want me to get into all of it, but yeah.
Well, I guess I'm curious, like on the one hand, I have, this like recoil from this answer that I'm talking about, which is like, I don't want to be sitting here telling you, Leticia, you just do too much and you should say no more and maybe you'll feel better, because it's not what I'm saying. But I think that's like that could be like the reductive way I could have taken the card. I think maybe there's some element to that may resonate for you, and only you will know that. So I guess I'm curious, like, are there backlash reactions to some of what I'm saying, and also resonant reactions?
Yeah. No, I mean, I really don't. I often feel like every time anyone has ever pulled tarot for me, or even just done a reading of other energetic readings or other things like that, like it's usually exactly the message I need. And so I'm usually pretty like, yeah, accepting of that. I think like, we were kind of talking about how we can, it's so easy to become separated from the body, like you said, when you go on autopilot and you have this idea of what your productivity level should be, because we're not questioning the systems that are making us labor endlessly to the point of almost killing ourselves. And like, I've told this to several people recently, but seeing the way that teachers are treated right now, and thinking about how I was treated as a teacher several years ago when I ended up leaving the profession of public education, I really like, and I was very ill during that time too, for other reasons, and like just kind of going, I think probably precursors to other things, but I was neglecting my health very badly, and I don't know that I would have lived through it. I truly don't. And so I think like, when you become so disconnected from the messages that your body is sending, sometimes your body has to send you some very extreme messages. I was hospitalized for like a urinary tract infection that, almost reached my kidneys, like because I wasn't going to the bathroom enough. I wasn't taking care of myself. Like and sometimes the body has to get extreme like that, right? Sorry, TMI, but it is kind of one of the
same thing. So
yeah, it can be really startling. And sometimes I think our first reaction is to treat our body as these machines that are supposed to function like a cell phone does, or like a computer does, right? Like, why aren't you working? What's wrong with you? Versus asking ourselves, what are we putting ourselves through that our bodies are having this reaction, right? And so, man, that got me a little bit. I was just about to tear up. But I think like even recently, my reaction to this card is, we at work, but also just kind of in my life, I'm promoting this book, and it's challenging to have a book come out during it came out in November of last year, which was right at the beginning of the Omicron surge, right? So everything I was doing was virtual, which I happen to think that, doing more virtual events has made things so much more accessible, especially for folks like me who A, are chronically ill, and also B, don't have huge budgets to travel and, do big book promotions. But it does make it challenging to promote a book. And so that's kind of like, I'm like, okay, well, now I can do some more in-person stuff, and I can kind of go again. But every time I've started to kind of like get back into that, in the back of my mind, I hear that voice saying, but why? Or I don't wanna, I don't want to be doing a million things every weekend. That's old me. That's pre-diagnosis me. That's me when I was kind of doing all those things. And do I really want to replicate that life for myself? And I think then my body just reacts to that message and says, no, because this is what's going to happen. So, yeah. Anyway, again, long-winded reaction to that card, but definitely feels resonant.
Well, and I think like it raises the question, what does it mean to have a conversation to be in dialogue with your body and not only feeling like victim to the pain that it sends you, but like, what could it look like to, for her, like, and it's interesting that like in this depiction of the card, actually a lot of her body is exposed and she's like soaking up some vitamin D and she's out in nature. And like, what would it mean for her to have a conversation with her body about like whether this cup that's being offered is a benefit to all of the parts of the self, the body, the mind, the spirit, and rather than like taking the drink and feeling the body punish you in the form of a hangover or whatever later.
Yeah.
And, I think it's really hard for us. I like what you said about treating the body like it's a piece of technology. Like, why aren't you working? Instead of treating it like, the only vehicle we have. Like if you had one car your whole life, you would and you knew you only got one, like you would take really good care of it. And you would get an oil change all the time. And like, or, every time you needed one. And you would try to make that car last as long as possible. And that's true of our body. Like you said, it's the only one we get. And like, how can we, but it's also hard as intellectual creatures to like conceptualize which part of me is my mind, which part of me is my spirit or my soul. And then where do I even separate that from like my physical self? Because they're all somehow, like my soul is somehow attached to my body. I have no scientific explanation for how that works or where one starts or one ends. So how can I have a conversation with like, that brings these pieces of me together? And how can I know when I'm listening to the body part and not just the mind part that wants me to be more productive or be more social or have the appearance of like being able to do X, Y, or Z. And so, anything I think that you can, and maybe this will come to you in a creative way or in new creative ways, like how to, and maybe even through your writing, like before, if a request comes or a demand or an expectation or someone's urgency comes at you, having even like in writing a dialogue with your body about like, what does your body say about this offer or this demand or this urgency? And starting to learn like if it has a voice or imagining it having a persona. And so, what if we like listen to the body first every time before we made a decision? Like, can you imagine such a world? Like, wow.
I think this would be, I absolutely, I love all of your journaling and writing prompts, but like that one is really speaking to me.
So after this, our next question, this is kind of like a couple of questions that are companions to one another. First, what's the most important place to be sending your energy right now? And then secondly, what do you not need to fuck with right now? So like, as soon as it knocks on your door, you're like, nope.
Yeah,
I know you and no way. So let's start with the most important place for energy to go. And what should I not be messing with? Okay. Interesting. So the most important place for your energy to go, we have the Wheel of Fortune, which is a very like undeterminate kind of card and makes me think that like there's not one correct answer for this question. And obviously it kind of depends on like what needs are arising at work or in your creative life. And also like the extent, how much value you place on those priorities. There are the ones that come at us where we're told they're urgent and important. And then we may agree with that intrinsically, like, yes, we should do this and get this done quickly because of X, Y, and Z. Or also some reaction, other kind of reaction to that where it's like, is that really urgent? And also life is always changing and shifting and certain things need our attention and certain things don't at different times. And so yeah, this one isn't really giving you a lot of direction in terms of what's most important. It kind of seems like perhaps a question of like budgeting, in terms of like, and I think this is really hard to quantify or conceptualize, but I have like X amount of energy to put out this week. What are the three most important things I think need to happen for myself and for the responsibilities that I've taken on? And maybe giving yourself some kind of like template to start each little period of time that can be changed and adjusted and like switched out depending on, work demands are lower. So maybe you can be more creative. Maybe there are certain things at work that you can phone in, which is a thing. Like no one would hire me to be part of anyone's HR department, but like, and I don't think you should phone in like creative writing programming for children, but there's also like, we can also manufacture all kinds of extra work that may or may not be that essential to the success of something. And I also think that a lot of us are perfectionists, and especially women, we have this because we're more underpaid. We have this desire to like demonstrate high performance. And so we execute on a really high level. And in fact, if we did something at 80% energy, we would probably do a pretty good job and nobody would notice or be mad. It would probably be like 100% compared to like someone else's version of doing the work. So that's when I advocate for phoning it in. But yes, not a clear answer on what to prioritize. And then what should I not be messing with? You have the magician. And so this is interesting because I love magician energy. It's our creative energy. It's our manifesting energy. It's the way that we bring what is in idea form into material form. Perhaps like your magician energy of manifesting and making like things super tangible is overutilized or has been overutilized lately. And that's not to say like, oh, you should stop writing, you should stop making things. But when you have to go from like idea all the way to making real, that can be a long journey. It can require a lot of effort. And so I wonder if like thinking about nurturing what's already kind of cooking for you, like pushing things forward in small ways and really lending a lot of belief to the power of small repeated actions, making something happen. Kind of like, pushing, what I'm thinking of is like pushing, nurturing, like you would water a plant a couple times a week. And that takes like, sometimes it's hard for me to find the energy to water the plants. I can definitely deprioritize my plants. But what can you do that requires more minimal effort to actually keep the thing growing? Rather than being like, oh, I have an exciting idea and I want to like bring it all the way out into the world. Let me set myself up for like a 2-year project or whatever would be, I think the mental energy plus the like psychological energy of like, how will I do it? How will I execute it? How long will it take? Can I do it? Kind of diminishing the expectations in a way and creating more belief around like small injections of energy and action can still produce really powerful results. But then of course, if there are other things that come to mind when you see the Wheel of Fortune or the Magician, plus your reactions to anything I've said, feel free.
It's funny, the Wheel of Fortune, the card, the just like first visceral reaction I'm having is that she looks like she's breaking the wheel, which is kind of interesting because you can't really spin it if your whole body is on top of it. I don't know why, but that's
true.
Both of these are interesting because part of, I wonder for me if I felt very unfocused lately. I think that's part of the issue is when you're drawn in too many different directions. the frustration becomes, I want to work on all these things, but then your energy is pulled in too many different directions that you can't really focus energetically on all those things. So you're not able to get further ahead on anything. And then you kind of hit this impasse. And so that's why that the Wheel of Fortune kind of makes sense to me in that way. And like, is that really the best way to be, you know, operating? And I really like, you know, I've been kind of thinking about transitioning away from certain roles lately, and like thinking about how can I make this sustainable to hand off to someone else. And as someone who is very, as you said, perfectionist, you know, in some ways, not in everything, but, you know, as far as when it comes to like my programming that I plan and like anything that is accountable to youth and accountable to other people, you know, I hold myself to a very high standard. But I think I like the idea of giving myself permission to let some of those things go or hand it off to someone else, knowing that they are capable and are going to make it great on their own. But it's hard when, you know, if you've ever taught or if you've ever kind of been in that position, it's hard to let go of that control. Especially for someone who, you know, is just kind of like an over planner, kind of overachiever type person. So yeah.
Yeah, delegating is definitely hard. And I think it's also like we get trained or feel this compulsion to take care of everything. Like I can do it faster. I can just get it done. Let me just like deal with it instead of like, let me trust someone else to like maybe do a pretty good job. And yeah, maybe I have to explain things and maybe I have to check their work, but I also get to focus on something else or I get to rest in the meantime. And that may be more valuable than, and someone else gets to learn something. And that may be more valuable to multiple people than me getting it done quickly with a kind of like resentful urgency, which isn't to say that that's what you have, but that would be how I would do it.
Yeah. All right.
Last question. Where can I find creative connection when I'm not feeling well? And this came up because you were talking about like how much community is a source of support, especially when a lot of our creative work happens individually. It's those moments of community experience around creative work that really feel incredibly nourishing and validating. And we can see how our work is impacting people. We can be impacted by other people's work. Is there anything else you want to say before I pull this card?
Yeah, I mean, I think that just my relationship to my creative communities have, you know, kind of shifted over the course of the last 2 years for a variety of reasons. But, you know, one of them being that like we, you know, couldn't physically be with one another and, you know, the pandemic, obviously, and just kind of your energy and capacity changes, you know, over time, especially with illness. And so I think I'm learning, I'm trying to relearn kind of where those connections need to be fostered and what can be let go of potentially. So, yeah.
The card I pulled for this is the Knight of Cups. So sex party, no, I'm kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Knight of Cups is very much about creative curiosity, following one's heart, feeling connected to what emotionally you're desiring and needing, and going forward with that as your guide. And so in terms of like a practical application, it seems like another opportunity to kind of utilize this in a slightly different way and say like asking yourself first, what kind of support would be helpful to me in this moment? Do I want a friend to send me a cute meme? Do I want a friend to let me send them a voice memo about the headache I'm feeling? I did that with one friend last week, so let me try a new friend. Or am I wanting someone to like read this paragraph and tell me their favorite sentence? Like like getting really creative too around like what kinds of support would actually feel uplifting. And simultaneously, I think in exchange being like, what kind of support would feel good for you right now? And maybe there are like little exchanges of support that can happen even when you're not able to necessarily like go out and connect with people for longer periods of time. You know, you talked about sometimes like a lot of the reading or connecting you're doing from your phone in your bed. And so like, what kind of text or request could you send that would give you a little bit of the nourishment you're looking for? And then first, you know, asking yourself, like, what is it that I think I need right now? Or like, what would feel good? But very much about like the heart space, the emotional space, desire, and curiosity. So kind of being curious about what your friends need and also being curious about what you feel like you need and finding, like, if I need this, what do I ask for? Or like, what are different things that would feel satisfying for that need? And what can I ask for? I don't know if that's helpful.
It's very helpful. And I wrote those questions down. I think I probably will forever struggle with asking for what I need. Because I'm even thinking about it now and I'm drawing a blank. I think it's going to require me to really like sit with it for a minute and really see, because, you know, maybe that's again why I've struggled is if you don't kind of explicitly ask these questions of yourself, but you think instead like, well, this is what I thought community felt like before, so that's what I should be pursuing. But it's like, but is that really what you want? You know, I think that's kind of what I struggle with. And as someone who was kind of always, you know, like being raised as a woman, as a cis woman, I guess, like there's always that feeling of being challenged when asking for what you want or need, right? And then if you're just that kind of type of person who has been kind of socialized to think always about what you can give to other people and a lot less about what you take, yeah, it's something I have to constantly retrain my brain about. You know, not just like asking a partner, right, or asking a friend, but asking your coworkers, yeah, all those things for sure. Because sometimes you found that it's easier to just do it yourself, but what if we had more sustainable ways to ask for help?
Yeah. And I like what you're talking about with women being socialized to look at the people around them, read their emotional state, over time discern a personality and a pattern, and preemptively offer or provide something to that person, perhaps before they've even asked. And so most of what we're doing is like reading all the needs of other people. And so when it comes time, when someone asks us, like, what do you need? What do you want? That like drawing a blank makes sense because we don't think about that. And no one ever asked us that question or hasn't asked us that question for a long time. And I've certainly been there where it's like, what, like, I'm sorry, what do I want? And I'm feeling that terror, or a kind of terror, where I look inside and I'm like, I have no fucking idea.
Right.
And why don't I know that about myself? And so I think it is kind of like a revolutionary act to start finding a practice of like touching into ourselves and feeling like, what urge, you know, what desire, what need, what would be soothing to me, what would feel nourishing to me. And some, you know, coming up with a word where it's like, whether it's like affection, understanding, listening, you know, like starting with some kind of like big word and then starting to think, okay, like what's kind of like a bite-sized request of that I can make of someone, because you don't like, and you're not used to asking other people for help. So the more you make the request, that's not to say like, if you need big help, you should fucking ask for it. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like training your nervous system to be more comfortable asking for support, starting with things that feel like creative or fun or not like a tall order to ask of someone. And also just to be like, you know, we're having this conversation about kind of how we implied in all of this is like how we wish the world was different. And so I think part of what we have to do too is like normalize or be role models that function in a normalizing way to say, you know, if you're ever leading a meeting, be like, what kind, you know, the end of the meeting is like, what kind of support do you need this week? And your whole staff is like, oh shit. And they know to start saying, you know, until it's like a practice. Yeah. And that's like a mini revolution too. But the more that you can because you're not alone in not wanting to be needy or ask for people's help. Like that's very true for a lot of people. So the more that we can like kind of break out of that, the more it becomes easier for everyone. And we have more communities of care, and we start thinking about like, you know, mutual aid on kind of like a micro level, not just as something we do when there's like a terrible thing that's happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. I think everything you're saying is really important. And like, and I also would say too, that it's hard sometimes for me, because I was just thinking about this as a Libra Sun, Aries Moon, to differentiate between attention, like wanting attention via validation, and wanting real affection, connection, you know, because attention is great, but it can often be the mask that we pull over like our real needs. Because it's almost it's like when someone likes a post you have, like, I'm like, oh yeah, you know, are you addicted to kind of getting that reaction, right? Which social media has often trained us to, you know, to feel good about. But it's like, is that really nourishing me? There's, you know, sustaining me in that way. I think there is a difference between those things. So yeah.
Yeah. And that gets confusing too, because like, then we learn, like, we also start to think like, oh, needing external validation isn't the way I should run my life. But it's also okay to want validation right. and attention. And I think, yeah, like with that Aries performative energy, like, look at me, let me dazzle you a little bit. Like you can also start with like, I'm wanting attention, but then there's another question, like, what kind am I wanting and why do I want it right now? So if it's like attention of affection, attention of touch, attention of listening, attention of watching me be a little performative and giving me some laughs or like whatever the case may be, and kind of learning to differentiate maybe slowly but surely. But yeah, it's a lot working against us. That's I guess what our life's work is to deprogram and figure out what we really need.
Well, and I just want to, and I just want to thank you, because I think, you know, part of why I was excited to have this conversation is because I think, you know, I hope that you are, you know, also taking time for yourself to care for yourself, because I know when you have your own business and kind of like all the different things that you're doing, it can be a lot. But I also just want to thank you for the creative spaces and messages that you offer through Typewriter Tarot and the Mystic Messages, and just and the retreats that you're offering, and all these, you know, kind of different offerings that I think really do try to kind of provide care, even if that care is kind of something that we take on our own to do, because it really does help. I think you have a talent for asking questions in a really stripped away way, if that makes sense, that you're kind of stripping away some of the like harmful layers that we often kind of like listen to above everything else. And you really ask us to get real with ourselves. So I just appreciate that. And thank you for doing that with me today, because this is a form of care that I find very helpful.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That means a lot. I definitely want this project to be an antidote, I think, to a lot of like the experiences we get from workplaces, from academic spaces, from capitalism, racial capitalism, white supremacy, all that nasty shit, patriarchy. And yeah, it's, you know, it's a lifelong project, I think, to like identify all those narratives that we're fed, figure out if they actually really work for us, and then develop some courage to live differently if that's what we want. And it definitely needs support. It needs community. So I hope that I can bring a little bit of that into the world. And I really appreciate your words very much. And I so appreciate you being on Cosmic Rescue. I'm going to review the tarot spread really quick for people who want to try it on their own. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us how we can get your book and how we can continue to support you. So for everyone wanting to try the spread, our first question is, what is my body wanting to tell me when I feel a particular sensation or pain? Question number 2, where is the most important place that my energy should be going, should be directed right now? Question number 3, what should I not be messing around with energetically because it's not serving me? And question 4, where can I find creative connection when I'm not feeling well? So Leticia, thank you for inspiring this tarot spread. Thank you for bringing more attention to our bodies and our well-being and how all of that is so connected to our creativity. And how can we support you? How can we get your book?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just so excited to be part of this conversation. Thank you for making it happen. My book, once again, Las Criaturas, is out now. You can purchase it from FlowerSong Press. And, you know, you can buy it on Amazon, but why? Don't.
Exactly.
You can buy it directly from the publisher. And this is a small press that really needs that full support. You can, you know, if you also want have like a bookshop.org account, you can buy it through them, and they support indie presses as well, and local bookstores. If you live in the Austin area, it is currently at Bookwoman, Resistencia Bookstore, and Malvern as well.
Awesome. Love it. Everyone go get yourself a copy, not from Amazon.
Yes.
And Leticia, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an honor and a pleasure to talk with you. I hope you get a lot of rest today and you feel better ASAP.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Tessa. This is great.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for Cosmic Rescue. I hope you will try the tarot spread that you saw in this episode. Taking care of the body is an essential, important thing. Whatever level of health you experience, it's important to check in with our bodies. So I encourage you to do that. And I encourage you to visit our website, typewritertarot.com, where you can learn more about one-on-one creative coaching with me, our membership program that provides weekly support and creative and magical practices for your creativity, and our events page, which has all of our upcoming events, classes, retreats, where you can nourish, invigorate, revitalize, and heal your creativity. So we'd love to connect with you. Come find us, and we hope to see you again soon.